Hi, I'm Tom Elliott, founder of OcuRoute, and I'm pleased to be sponsoring this podcast. If you need help taking control of your CI/CD pipelines, come see us at ocuroute.com.
Hey, it's Dan Melnick. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zing, and I'm proud to be a sponsor of this podcast. So please check us out today as we can help fuel your business growth. myzing.io. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt Little. I'm the Director of Counseling and Education at EmpoweringAwareness.Asia, and I'm a proud sponsor of this podcast.
Hi, Jake.
How are you?
How are you, sir?
Okay.
Firstly, thank you very much for giving me opportunity to interview you for my podcast.
Sure. Where are you coming from?
I'm from India, South India.
Yeah, I realize that, but where in India? It's a big country.
Yeah, in Hyderabad city.
Okay, gotcha.
I've gone through your profile. I can see you are doing wonderful work. So I thought to tell about your work to my audience.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. My name's Jake Novak. Talking to you from New York, in the United States. I'm currently the anchor and executive producer of a program called American Sunrise Early Edition, which you can watch on a TV network called Real America's Voice. You can watch it anywhere in the world on X or on their website for free, the America's Voice News website. I've been working in TV news for a little bit more than 30 years right now. I've executive produced programs for local news in the United States. I'm sure you have this in India. Also, every city has its own local news stations, 2 or 3 of them, in addition to the national news stations. And I did that for a local for 6 years, and then I went to national news. I was at CNN, I was at Fox, I was at CNBC. I worked for some other groups. I also worked for 2 years as a diplomat for the Israeli consulate in New York. I'm not an Israeli citizen, but I helped them with their media messaging. I was like their broadcast media director. But then I went back to TV, and then I was also last 2 things. I'm also an editorial columnist and economic analyst for many years. When I was at CNBC, I was running shows on the TV network, but I was also the senior editorial columnist. And I continue to do a lot of writing along those lines as well, about politics and economics, and about culture. And yeah, after all those years of being behind the camera and just writing, I finally decided to do something in front of the camera as well. So that's the short bio right there.
So how is this being in front of camera now?
Well, it's very natural. I don't feel any nerves or any difference like that. It helps that I don't have any hair, so I don't have to do hair or makeup in the morning to go on TV. But it's so the big challenge now is it's the extra work. I'm still producing the show. I also have to report it and be in front of the camera and book the guests and all of that. But it's getting a little bit easier. I've been doing this show on the air as the anchor since the middle of December, so it's been 4 months now, and it's been great. It's been great. It's a very it's an audience that we're trying to build. I know the audience is getting bigger. And I think that people hopefully are at least enjoying it. Obviously, I come from a conservative standpoint in my politics, and I do have a very political program. But I also do financial news. I do news every day about the auto industry in the world. I love showing video of cars and trucks. I think people love that, and I like talking about the financial aspect of it, but also the technology aspect of it. And I try to keep things light. This is not an angry program. We make a lot of jokes. And the guests have been really they've been willing to play along. So, but it's hard work. I mean, I have to wake up early in the morning and make sure I don't go to sleep before some big news stories happen that I might miss overnight. But I'm glad to have the opportunity.
So what's your past experience that are helping you to do great work today?
Well, I will talk about my educational experience, but first, you have to talk about who you are as a personality. One of the things I realized about myself, probably as early as high school and maybe even earlier, was that I like to talk about the news. I like to talk about it with people, not just with myself. And I like to have that kind of interaction. And I guess I realized that if I went into any other career, I would probably lose my job because I'd be talking about the news and public events too much at the office and they would kick me out. So I realized that that was something that I needed to do. So for those of you who are interested in television news or in reporting, ask yourself, are you really that interested in these stories that even if you didn't have this job, you'd want to talk about it, you'd want to engage with people, not just inform people, but hear what other people have to say? And if your answer is no to that question, it may not be, you might be very successful in the business. There's a lot of people like that that I know. I've worked for 30 years with the majority of my coworkers who I could tell didn't really care about the stories they were reporting on or working on. As soon as the day was over, they never wanted to talk about it again. I still want to talk about it. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you're the kind of person who wants to do this, because even though you might be successful, you might not like it and it'll be a very, very boring job for you. But as far as education is concerned, you don't really need a formal education in the United States to get into journalism, even TV journalism. It doesn't really help all that much. However, I had no experience at all. My 4 years in college, I wrote editorials for the school newspaper, but I didn't do reporting out on the street. And I certainly didn't know anything about TV. So after a couple of years of work after college, I did decide to go to graduate school for journalism, a journalism graduate school at Northwestern University in Chicago. And their journalism school is called the Medill Journalism School of Journalism. And I mostly went to that program. It was a 1-year program just to learn how television news works, all the technical things. And it was a really good choice for me because it gave me real working skills. Theoretically, I didn't need anyone to tell me about what was going on in the world. I didn't need people to tell me how to write for an editorial. I did need to have people tell me how to write for TV. If you're writing for TV, your sentences must be much shorter. Yeah, they have to be much more direct, because it doesn't matter how smart your TV viewer is or someone watching on the phone is. They're unable to slow it down and reread it like if it were a newspaper. So you have to have short sentences, quick and to the point. The subject of your sentence and the verb of your sentence need to be as closely married as possible, because it's hard to follow in a live broadcast unless you do that. So I got those skills, and it only took about a year to get them. So, and then I decided to, I always wanted to run my own programs. I didn't want to be an intern or a production assistant. So I went to some of the smaller towns here in the United States to be in charge of the newscast there. So my first newscast was at an ABC television station in Bangor, Maine, which is in the north of the United States. Then I was in Decatur, Illinois, which is 2 hours south, a little bit less than that, about an hour and 45 minutes south of Chicago. It's an industrial town. That's where Archer Daniels Midland and Staley are headquartered, and Caterpillar used to have a big factory there. Then I went to Cleveland. These were all for about a year or so, not very long. And then I returned to New York in the year 1997. So I've been back in New York ever since. I was not born in New York, but I've lived most of my life in New York. So I came back and eventually found that I liked financial news the best, because financial news is much more exact. There's much less editorializing in financial news. And I learned a lot. You know, you learn a lot. When you have a different story every day in general news, you never learn much about the topic. But financial news, if you do it day after day, you will learn a lot about economics. You'll learn a lot about the financial and the stock market. So I did that for many, many years, in addition to politics and writing about it and things like that. So those are my two biggest pieces of advice. Make sure you have the heart and the personality for journalism, someone who really is interested in these stories, even if you weren't reporting on them. And second, find a way to be learn something find a way to get actual expertise in a particular topic. Become what they call in America a beat reporter. There's nothing worse than these people who go on TV and talk about a story and they have no idea what they're talking about. And you can tell if you know the topic. And financial news reporters and sports news reporters in the United States are by far the most educated on the topic. Everyone else, not so much. So, break the trend if you don't want to do finances or sports. But the first thing is to learn and get an expertise in a particular topic in society, and then become a reporter on it, not the other way around.
So how you are able to get knowledge in multiple domains? You are into finance, you are into politics, you are into economics. So how you develop this skill? And also, I can understand you worked before in local news channels and now into national media. So how different it is working?
Well, I did take some classes in college, obviously, in economics and finance, and I was a political science major. And of course, a lot of political science is economics, but that's really just scratching the surface. To really learn about it, you need to do the same thing you need to do to become a good journalist, and that is talk to people who are in the industry. I had some very close friends from my childhood, from my high school years, who became major players in the financial world here in New York City. And I talked to them regularly about what was going on in their careers and what was going on in the business world, and I got their opinions. Some of them became regular guests on my programs, and some of them didn't. In fact, the ones who didn't were the ones I respected more, because they were the ones who felt that they didn't want to give people the wrong impressions about certain things, and um, they were being protective of their own investors and not going on TV and giving it away for free. So that's one thing. I mean, seek out the people who are in these industries. Most people, especially men, are happy to tell you about their work all day long. They'll talk for an hour about it. I don't know about women as much, although I think women will do it too. So that's important. You can't just read it in a book. You can't just watch it on TV. You need to talk to the people who are really in it, and never stop doing that. Again, that's why I chose the profession. I like talking to people, and I like hearing what they have to say as much as I like talking to them. And there's a lot of people in journalism who don't like that. It's like having a doctor who doesn't like the sight of blood. I don't understand why you became a doctor. I don't understand why there are so many people in TV and in newspaper journalism who clearly don't want to hear from the people. They want to lecture the people. They want to pretend like they know what they're talking about all the time, and they don't. And even if they don't agree with them, like, what's wrong with hearing another perspective? I have no problem with that. I don't have a problem with the fact that there are 7 billion people on Earth right now with a phone who can be a journalist as soon as they turn on that camera and tell me what's going on right in front of them. Most people in my industry are threatened by that. They hate that. I never did. I didn't have a problem when people started blogging. I didn't have a problem when people started doing stuff with their phones. I didn't have a problem with social media. I understand a lot of it is junk and a lot of it is misleading and some of it is even hateful. But that's life. Everyone, you can find that walking down the street any day. So but again, that's also a great way to learn. When you get those voices and people telling you this is happening in their area, maybe you'll actually learn something instead of just talking about what's going on in New York and Washington all the time, which is a real problem here in the United States. Overwhelming majority of our journalists either live in New York or Washington, D.C., and they have no concept of what the rest of the country is doing or thinking.
So you have been in the media industry from almost 30 years. So you have seen the technology evolution. So you witnessed it. So how do you define this? How this is impacting this technology today, from past 30 years, how technology is impacting and how it is being changed in front of your eyes?
Yeah, when I started getting into TV news, they were just they were just now at that point. This was 1994 when I finished graduate school and started in local news. The world of television news had just transferred to using computers. They used to use typewriters with regular paper, and they used to have to type things out. And they just started with computer systems where you could type in a story and it would appear on the teleprompter in the studio, and you could actually have what we call a rundown, which is a list of our stories in the order of the stories that they appear. So that was just starting. I mean, I didn't see the typewriter era, but that was only maybe 2 or 3 years before I got into some of these newsrooms. And it probably seemed like the people who had used the typewriters as a big improvement. For me, it was incredibly difficult. These programs were very clunky. They didn't work very quickly. It was hard to put in even the smallest amount of information, but it still was an improvement apparently over the pre-computer era. Um, Most of that now has gotten easier and easier. In fact, the computer program I use right now, which is called Rundown Creator, is the best program I've ever used in 30 years in the business. It's very easy for me to put in what I need to put video in, to put graphics in. But it's considering it's been 30 years, we should be further along. I'm surprised by some of the programs that are used in local news and national news newsrooms these days. The rundown program they use is something called ENPS, and it's terrible. It's terrible. It's very hard to use. One of the most important things about news, especially if you're doing a live program, is to be able to have the flexibility to change everything up on a fly when a breaking news story comes in. And that ENPS program makes it almost impossible. So I could have the most important story in the world coming, and I need to wait 5 or 6 minutes before I can finally insert it into my program, which is unacceptable. Unacceptable. I would never allow that when I was running shows. So that's one way that technology has changed things. There's great the biggest difference in technology is now our access to video. We have video now. It used to be that CNN, the old CNN, when CNN was really present throughout the world and they had a camera in every country in the world, they were the only news organization that could bring you news no matter what country it was going on in right away, because they made this huge investment. It was a big investment financially to put a camera crew and some kind of bureau in every country in the world. They very much reduced that. Right now, if you watch CNN here in the United States, their entire news day, their entire day long of programming is something I could do out of my basement here in New York. They don't go out in the world anymore, which is a shame. And I'm sure that for people who are watching in a place like India, it's frustrating to see that. If you ever watch American news, there's very little foreign news, and it's not good. But at the same time, it is easier for us to get video from those countries without having to have our own camera there. It's being sent to us. Sometimes it's over social media. Sometimes it's over some of the other, just the internet itself has made it much easier for us to do that. But you would think that with the internet and with social media, there would be at least American journalists all over America, let alone all over the world, because it doesn't matter. You don't need to live in Washington or New York anymore, right, to send the video in instantly and report instantly. And yet it's the other way around. There's even more journalists in America who are centered in DC and New York than ever before, even though the technology makes it possible for someone to be in India or in Idaho or anywhere else and be a reporter and do a broadcast. So the technology is there. It's just not being utilized enough. But for somebody like me who likes to get video of, like I said, I like to do I do about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes every day on the auto and truck industry in the whole world, not just the US industry. And usually I have a couple of stories about funny things that have happened. A very fancy sports car that someone has crashed. No one got hurt, but it's like, look at that $1 million sports car. And I can get that video in a second now. I don't have to, I would have to have waited weeks when I started in this business for that. So that to me is a total positive. I think there's no negatives connected with that. My only big disappointment is that with all this new technology that makes it easy for us to report all over the world, it's not being used. And it's not just the United States. I think everyone is kind of guilty of this, and it's a shame. And hopefully someone will figure this out soon and start using this technology as it was meant to be used.
So, you are a political analyst, and politics is a subject which constantly changes. So, how you are able to get the information and be adaptive and have analysis about what's going on every minute?
Well, the key to that is something that almost nobody has in the television news business, especially people who are in front of the camera. The key to that is one word: humility. I have been humbled many times, especially over the last 10 years, by things that I thought were true and then find out they weren't true, or I was only a little bit on the right track. When I have been convinced that I was wrong about something, which happens, that's when I do my best work. So, for example, in 2016, all through the beginning of 2016, at the end of 2015, I was writing editorials explaining how Donald Trump could never win the presidential election, and this wasn't going anywhere. And then in May of 2016, which was 6 months before the election, I realized I was wrong. It just came to me. It came to me. I realized I had been wrong, and I wrote an editorial in May of 2016 saying the headline was, "I was wrong. Donald Trump will win the election," and I explained why. There's been a number of things. So humility has to be a part of your political coverage. There's very little of that. We have a lot of, it's one thing when political candidates who run for a particular party or have a particular ideology never change their minds about something, because that's kind of what they're hired to do. They're hired by people who believe in that stuff to always promote it. It's a shame that they don't change their minds about things, but it's more understandable. It's much worse when journalists just don't ever change their minds. And it's worse when political pundits, analysts, and I never pretend to be unbiased. I'm always giving you my biased opinion from time to time. Sometimes it'll be more conservative, sometimes it'll be more liberal, but I admit that it's my opinion. But it's so sad when you see people like me who are supposed to be analysts who never change their mind about anything, never learn anything. And you see that a lot here in the United States. Most of the people who have been bashing Donald Trump from the beginning have never changed their minds about it. Some have. And it's been interesting that some have. Some have changed their minds about it. But some have. And they've done it out of humility. They realized they were wrong about something. I was wrong about a lot of things. And I don't support everything Donald Trump does. I support most of his policies, but I also don't support him personally because I also don't hate him personally. I don't know him. One of the things that voters and other people don't understand is they think they're voting for the person. You don't know the person. I mean, I know there are some people who do know him personally. I'm not one of them. I never met President Obama. Don't know him. I never met President Biden. I don't know him. I don't know any of these people personally. If I did, maybe I would give you my opinion of them if I felt it wasn't too private. But I can only judge someone by their actual policies. And I like most of his policies. He's the first president whose policies I've liked for the most part since Bill Clinton. I liked most of his policies too. I liked most of Ronald Reagan's policies. Did I know any of these men? No. Will you ever know any of these men? Probably not. So stop voting for people based on what they look like, what they sound like, and vote for them and analyze them if you're in journalism for what they've actually done. We spend a lot of time guessing about personalities. We spend a lot of time in journalism also reporting on what someone said. Now, we have to do that. We have to report on what they said. But when you start reporting, giving more weight to something somebody says as opposed to what they do, you're being a bad journalist. I don't want to live in a world where words are worth more than actions. And in the journalism world, all over the world, not just in the United States, that's absolutely where we are right now. Somebody says something and it gets more weight and attention than what they actually do, which is a recipe for disaster, both in journalism and for politics and for all of society. So those are some of the things that, but the word is humility. If you aren't someone who could admit they were wrong about something, go for it. With, for example, the current tariff battle, the way I see it right now, I don't like tariffs. I think they're terrible. But I have yet to be shown by someone a better way to get someone to reduce the tariffs against you than fighting fire with fire. In other words, the only way to stop someone from putting a tariff on your products is to put a tariff on their products and say, hey, you do this to me, I'm going to do it to you. Now, if someone has a better solution for that, I will be the first to go on TV and say, I was wrong. The fight fire with fire philosophy was wrong. Look at what this guy came up with, or this woman came up with, to fix the problem without having to fight tariff for tariff. But until I see that, I'm not going to say that. But if I do, I really know, I feel pretty strongly that I would be willing to admit that I was wrong about something. You can't be a good journalist or political analyst without humility, and that means sadly that about 90% of political analysts are bad because they don't have any humility, and you can see it every day, and it's really discouraging.
So being a political analyst is a very challenging job and challenging role. So how this role actually impacted you as a human being? Like any changes
Yeah,
happen?
I've lost friends. I've had family members who don't want to talk to me anymore. This happens. I think it happens. In the United States, we're still a very religious country compared to other Western countries, but we're losing our religion in this country. There's fewer devout Christians and Jews in this country than there were 50 years ago. And sadly, a big replacement for religion and the devout nature of religion and the blind belief of religion has been politics. There's no such, in my opinion, I have a saying, there's no such thing as a non-religious person. Everybody has a religion. And for a lot of people in the United States, politics has become the new religion. So when they lose an election, it's not just, oh, I lost my election, we'll try better next time. It's, oh my God, you've desecrated my temple. My beliefs have been destroyed. It's kind of like the ancient times when one city-state would fight against another city-state. It was also considered that their gods were fighting too. I thought we had moved past that as human beings, but apparently not. So it's been tough because people don't just look at me when they disagree with what I'm saying politically. They look at me as if I'm someone saying that their religion is garbage. And that's not what I'm saying, but that's what they see it as. So it's tough. You get attacked personally, but I'm used to it. I'm used to it. I go to a dinner party and someone wants to argue with me about something. First of all, I never start the conversations about politics in social settings. That's not me. But people find out what I do and they want to challenge me or they want to talk to me about it. And I'll do my best to remain polite, but I don't back down on something that I believe. Sometimes I'll say, like, let's agree to disagree. But it's been rough. You know, there have been people who have come after me who've said really, really horrible things. People and people who I thought were very close to me who haven't stood up for me, haven't been loyal to me when they know I've been attacked by people that they know are not being fair. And that's very, very sad. But I hate to only make it about the sad stories. I've also made new friends because of it. There are people I talk to every day who I never would have met and never would have made friends with if it weren't for my political writings. And I'm a better person for that as well. It's just, you know, it's bittersweet. There's been some things that I've lost. I've lost some good connections with people because they are so religiously connected to their politics that they can't let go even for a second, even for an old friend or a family member. And I wish people could tone it down, but they're not going to tone it down unless they find something else that they need to fervently believe in. So, you know, I'm a member of the oldest, you know, religion in the Western world. I don't need to join a new one. I've already got one. I would urge people not to choose politics as their religion, not to choose your football or cricket team as your religion. Go with one of the old religions because at least they have better food.
As a communicator, you have been successful in three different communication mediums. One is in writing, and one is behind the camera as a radio host, and now in front of camera, communicating, being physically present. So how different it is, and how you are able to be good at all these three.
Well, you know, one of the things is that there's not enough people who are doing radio and TV. Radio, not so much. TV, there's a lot of people on TV who, if they were asked to write and produce their own show, couldn't do it. And that's bad. Let's put it simply. You know, it's one of those things like if you're a pilot of a jet, you would hope that that pilot also knows how to be the navigator in case the navigator gets sick, also knows how to be the, you know, get on the communication devices and things like that. I think that there are dedicated people in every industry who know how to do more than one job. And I would urge everyone watching, even if you're not interested in getting into journalism, if you're going to go work at a bank, and let's say you're working in the investment banking division, find out as much as you can about the retail banking. Find out as much as you can about the marketing division, just so that you know as much as you can about a business. You know, in the United States, and I think this is true in India as well, but it's certainly true in the United States, most of the most successful CEOs come from sales. In other words, if you're like, let's say a company like GM, they weren't people who were actually building or designing the cars, but they were in sales. They were the ones who were going out all over the country. And not only did they have to be experts on everything about GM so they could tell it to the potential customers, but then they learned from the customers what they wanted. And so they had this unique inside outside understanding. So as a journalist, that's again more of what I was saying earlier. You want to be a good journalist, first of all, learn how to write all the stories, produce a rundown, which is the word we use for basically the list of stories, how long you're going to spend on every story, how you're going to do it, so that anyone looking at that paper can say, oh, here's what I can expect on this hour of news. This story, that story, oh, here's this reporter, all that. So learn how to do all those things. But also make sure that you're not in your bubble of your newsroom and you're hearing what you're, not just the viewers. Don't say, oh, I always listen to my viewers. That's also a bubble. Make sure you're going out there and hearing from all the people, even if they're not watching your show or reading your newspaper, and hear from as many people as possible. Make sure that you're not closed off. You know, we saw that over the last week with all the tariffs. You know, if you're a Wall Street investment banker or a financial news journalist, and all you've in your only experience with manufacturing in America is reporting on their stock price, don't talk. This is not the time for you to talk right now. I love Bill Ackman, the hedge fund investor. I like him a lot, but he shouldn't have said anything yesterday about the tariffs. This is a man who is a Wall Street billionaire. He's never lived in a blue collar town. He's never worked in a factory. He shouldn't talk. Doesn't mean he's wrong. It's just read the room. Understand that this is not the time for you to talk. So that's another thing. You know, a good journalist needs to know when to talk and when to listen. And I like listening to people who have had an experience. I may not agree with it, and I may listen and think the whole time, like, oh my God, this is awful. But at least I know what someone else is thinking, and I've listened to them. That's a huge, huge problem. So that really is what helps me put together a program, because the hardest thing to do as a journalist is deciding what story you're going to cover and where it's and whether it's going to be a big coverage, a small coverage, or even whether you're going to cover it or not. And I very rarely have a problem with making those choices because I'm listening to so many voices every day that I at least can decide to myself, well, maybe I'm not that interested in this, but I know a lot of other people are, so I'm willing to go ahead and do the story. If you're not listening to people, you won't know how to do that. You won't know how to present it on camera yourself, and you sure as heck won't know how to put it into a rundown and write it for someone else, let alone even for yourself.
So being in the communication profession and being a communicator in all different ways in this 30 years, how can you be so conscious? Yeah, because your job needs a lot of consciousness.
Well, one of the things is I don't watch a lot of other mainstream news media. And now, I like watching and reading stories from other countries and from smaller outfits. But if I just watched all the big news programs here in the United States, I don't learn anything new. They all have the same stories that I already knew. I kind of know what their angle on it is going to be. Keeping the focus has a lot to do with just being willing to. So I've already talked about listening to other voices. Another big part of it is reading. You know, I read only nonfiction books. It's not that I have anything against novels. I don't think they're a waste of time or anything. It's just that I always have a big nonfiction book that I'm reading about a particular topic. And it may never be anything that ever comes up in any of my news programs, but almost all the time it does. Something comes up. So some of it is about history. A lot of times I'm reading about history. So that gives me a good perspective. A lot of bad news reporting in both newspapers and on the websites and on TV is when you hear a journalist saying the word unprecedented. This has never happened before. Whenever they say that, they're probably wrong. It has happened before. They just don't know. So that's one thing. But also you hear from people who have particular expertise. I remember every one of these books, some of the points that I remember from them, and it helps me understand what's going on now. So I highly recommend that also. And I don't recommend the more pop culture books out there, the ones that are trendy. I recommend books that really explain an issue that's important, but may not be front and center in the news, or it should be. We talk about things like, and I know this is a big issue in India as well. In the United States, we sort of talk about the word infrastructure, which is a terrible word to use in an English language program because it sounds so boring. Instead use the words like traffic jam, bad roads, commuting. These are words that are not only more interesting, but they get people really upset. Like there's nothing worse for me than being stuck in traffic. I really hate that. So I want to hear someone talk about that. So I've read a lot of books about what actually causes traffic. It's not as easy as you might think. How do we build a better city? How do we build better transportation? I've written a lot about that over the years, and I could have only have written about that over the years if I had, because I read so many books about people who have solutions. And that's another thing I want to say. A lot of journalists think their job is to find the problems and things, and that is part of our job. But a lot of journalists think that's the only job. In other words, they can report about a problem with something over and over again. I had a rule, and I still have a rule, with any show that I'm in charge of or I'm doing. If you've reported on a problem more than twice, and you haven't either interviewed someone who has a potential solution for this or you haven't proposed one yourself, you're no longer allowed to report on it. Because now you're just repeating a problem and you've done nothing to try to make it better. And even worse, you haven't even tried to find the people who are trying to make it better. So, for example, water. When I was growing up, a little bit after the Cold War ended. So, I was in high school during the Cold War. The Cold War ended when I was in college. But the first major emergency in the world that they were scaring everybody about after that was the argument that we won't have enough clean water for the world pretty soon. And that story was pounded into our heads for a long time. And you know that a tremendous amount of the world's clean water problems have been solved. They haven't been put into place yet everywhere, but a lot of nations in the world have come up with solutions for this. Most importantly, with agriculture and things like that, and clean water supplies for irrigation. I'm not saying we have to throw a parade for this, but it's absolutely a scandal that some of the same reporters who were trying to scare everybody in the world into total despair over clean water issues just a few years ago have never even bothered to listen to or interview the people who have basically kind of solved this problem, or at least theoretically solved it. And I can name you a number of other issues that are the same way. It doesn't mean we have to be happy news all the time and have a parade. But if you're going to scare people and talk about problems and you don't even have the ability to tell the good news, then again, you're really not doing a good job. We see that this morning. We've had 4 or 5 days of the stock market all over the world selling off and in really big losses, and everyone's going crazy about it. There's been very little news this morning about how the markets opened strongly and higher, and how yesterday's markets in the United States cut more than 2/3 of their losses before they closed. In fact, one of the indices, the Nasdaq, which is a very tech-heavy actually closed higher yesterday. Now, again, I'm not saying we throw a parade, but if you're going to spend your time scaring people about things and you don't even try to find someone who's trying to get a solution, then you're being a bad journalist. And unfortunately, most people are bad journalists.
So how different it is being a political analyst when compared to working and doing analysis on finance industry or economics or sport. How different and how challenging it is.
Well, it's only challenging because sometimes you're swimming upstream. You're dealing with people who, um, I mean, you're comparing yourself to the mainstream news media, the regular news media that isn't focusing on just finance, where there's, like I said before, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance. People are reporting on stories that they really don't know about, and that's a problem. In the financial news industry, most of the financial news reporters, really almost all of them, are pretty well versed, are very well educated pretty much on economics, or at least the financial markets. The problem is they do the same thing that I was talking about before. They think their job is to talk about a problem in the financial news world, and only talk about that and uncover scandals and things like that. So you have someone like there's a television news anchor in the United States. His name is Andrew Ross Sorkin, and Andrew is someone who really likes to talk about scandals. He brings people on the air who think they're about to talk about their business and how much money it's made, and he immediately says, like, well, did you commit this crime? And it's really all he's interested in. It turns out that he also was one of the writers for the Showtime series Billions. I don't know if you watched that in India, which is all about scandal and high finance and all that kind of stuff. So he's interested in that, and he has every right to be interested in that. But if he's only going to scare people, if he's only going to scrutinize folks, and people should be scrutinized. You can't just come on and be praised for how rich you are. And people should ask if there's a question. But that's all some of these people are interested in. So that's the challenging thing. I don't know why this is about me, but when I see someone who's very successful in a business or an industry, my first inclination is hey, I want everybody to know about this. Doesn't mean I like the person, doesn't mean I even like the product that they're making, but I like letting people know about success. I don't get resentful. There's plenty of things that are bad about me. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but when I see someone who's very successful, I don't get resentful. The first question in my mind isn't how did they cheat and lie to get that. Those are not the things that run through my mind, at least not right away. And I like to get excited. I want people to be excited about something that someone has achieved, in the hopes that maybe that will inspire someone else to do it. Maybe it'll inspire me. Maybe I'll make $1 billion one day. I don't know. So it's one of those things but it's a challenge, because most of the people in financial news are dreaming of the headline where they say Bank of America stole $1 trillion, or this CEO just killed someone. I mean, that's what they're dreaming of, and that's not my dream. If it's a story, it's a story. And I've reported on scandals. I had a scandal years ago when I was at Fox Business, where there was someone who was working as an investor in pharmaceutical companies, who was having an affair with someone at I believe it was Morgan Stanley. And that woman at Morgan Stanley was getting inside information about what he was going to invest in. So it's not like I have a problem with reporting on scandals. I really don't. But that's not what wakes me up in the morning and gets me going. And I don't think that should be the focus. And that is still a problem in financial news. It really is. And it's making people miss some of the great stories out there. I talked about water. There are companies that have solved so much of our water problems. No one's ever heard of them. If they went and committed a crime, then people would hear about them. But no one hears about them when they do something good. We've had incredible advancements in the fight against cancer in this country and all over the world over the last 10 years. Very few people have heard about it. All we've heard about is COVID this and this pharmaceutical scandal. We haven't heard about all those great things. And there's a lot of other examples of this. And financial news is just as guilty as the rest of the news on that, even though financial journalists tend to be much, much more well-versed in their subject matter, which is something I insist on. I will never work again with people who can't find India on the map, or people who don't know who the prime minister of India is, or people who don't know where Russia is on the map. I mean, or people who don't know where Israel is, or any of those things, or don't know the history. I can't do that anymore. And it's when you work in financial news or you do your own program like I do, you avoid that problem. And also sports. The sports reporters are the most knowledgeable. If you're a sports reporter and you get the name wrong of a player, you will never work again. But you can be a $10 million a year anchorman on NBC News in America and mispronounce the name of the leader of India and not be able to find it on a map, and you'll be just fine. And that's a problem. That's a big problem.
So tell me, you as executive producer.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Tell me, you as executive producer.
With some of the better interviews I've done? Is that what you're asking?
No, no. Tell me, you as executive producer. You are producing your show.
Oh, I mean, like being a producer?
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that, and I think this is probably true in India as it is in the United States. If you're interested in getting into television news, first of all, learn how to be a producer. Even if your dream is to be on camera and to be the big star, like I said before, it's very important to know how to produce programs, especially now, because you don't need as big a staff. When I got into local news, you needed to have cameramen, you needed to have videotape editors, you needed to have people, a control room with a lot of people in it working all the video. Now, one person can do all of those jobs theoretically. So learn how to produce, and that was true even before all these technological advances. But but I have to say that if you're looking to get into it, if you learn how to be a producer and you're willing to produce, you'll probably always find a job in this business, because everyone wants to be in front of the camera. People who are willing to actually produce it as well, or just produce it, are less plentiful, and they're always in demand. So that's how I got into the business, and I still enjoy producing a program, especially if I think it's a quality program and the person in front of the camera is very good. It's just at this stage in my career, I'm 54 years old, it was time for me to be in front of the camera as well, to make sure that the news and the messages I wanted to get out became completely unfiltered. And by the way, that makes it a little bit easier as a producer. When a producer changes the rundown of a show or the script of a show, he has to tell everybody. Got to tell the person on camera, got to tell the control room, got to call the reporter. I don't have to do any of that. I just have to tell myself, and I'm able to do it on the fly. So all of that makes things a little bit easier. That's one of the easier jobs. Although I do wish I had some assistance. I would love to have someone call my guests. I'll tell them who to call, but I would love to have them call them the night before to remind them how to use Skype or Zoom, because a lot of them don't know. Little things like that can be frustrating. Maybe one day I'll get an assistant.
So tell me about the American Sunrise Early Edition.
Sure. So the name of the show is, as you said, American Sunrise Early Edition. It's on 7 a.m. U.S. time in New York. I don't know what time that is. It's probably like almost 7 p.m. your time. 7 a.m. Eastern time to 8 a.m. And it's on a channel called Real America's Voice. Here in the United States, we have more channels than we used to. Each one of the channels, when I was growing up, we had basically, if you turned on the TV, you had 3 or 4 channels to choose from. That's it. Now there's hundreds. Real America's Voice has been around for a few years. It's mostly headquartered in Florida, although they also have a studio in Denver. I do the show out of New York. They came to my house and built me a nice little studio here, which is really nice. I'm not using it right now, but so I do it out of my home. And Real America's Voice has 24/7 programming. There's my show that's from 7 to 8 a.m. There's a show before me from 6 to 7 a.m. And all day. And there are some bigger names on this network. There's a man named Steve Bannon, who was a very close advisor to President Trump, who has a show from 10 to noon. Again, this is New York time in the United States. Charlie Kirk, who was one of the leaders of the young pro-Trump movement on campus and younger people. He has a show from noon to 2. Another man named Jack Posobiec. These are all younger people except for Steve Bannon, who's a little bit older than I am, and on down the line. So my show every day, though, is, while it does include analysis and I do have a guest, my job in the morning is to get everyone aware of the bigger stories of the day. Again, it's mostly a political program, and most news in America has become political news anyway, but I still do some financial news. Like I said, I still do the car news every day, which I love doing, the latest news from the auto and car. It gives me an excuse to show sports cars and trucks and things like that. But also I report on the serious situations there, job cuts and the stock prices and all those kinds of things. I've been reporting a lot about how Honda was going to buy Nissan and then they decided not to. That was a big story for me that I covered. But for the most part, I'm letting you know what's going on in American politics. So this morning, my lead stories, of course, were the fact that the stock market was going to open up this morning after many days of declines. Also, the fact that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the White House yesterday, and I explained why. It wasn't really just about trade, it was about other things. I talked about the Supreme Court decision here in the United States that has allowed the Trump administration to continue to deport criminal illegal aliens, those who commit crimes in addition to crossing the border illegally, and on down the line. Those were the big stories today that if you're waking up, you kind of need to know no matter who you vote for in this country. And so I do that mostly. And then I have a guest at the 7 o'clock half hour that I speak to, a different one every day, and then a different guest every day in the 7:30 half hour. And each of them go on with me for about 10 minutes each. And I ask them about the big stories of the day, what they think about them. So the kinds of guests that I'm looking for are people who can talk about multiple stories. I don't have enough time in a 1 hour show to do a segment about one story and then with one guest and then go to another guest because it's a lot of work for me to book guests on only one story. So I'm always looking for people who feel comfortable, as I have for many years, talking about 5 or 6 different stories and giving me their opinion about it, their honest opinion about it. So it moves fast. It's a 1 hour program. Almost everyone says the show goes really, really quickly when they're watching it. It goes even faster when I'm doing it. But it's a lot of fun because I feel like I get a chance to give the stories, but then I can stop anytime I want and offer some clarity and commentary on it, and give people hopefully something they haven't heard elsewhere. I think most people, even if they don't like my show, would have to admit it's not like the information and the analysis they get on my show is different from what they hear elsewhere.
So, like you said, it is different from other analysis. So, how you develop that different analytical skills?
Well, you know what? I think that I'm a little bit more well versed in some of the details of the realities out there politically. So, like I said, I'm coming from a conservative standpoint. Most of my viewers are Trump supporters. But you'll be surprised how even people who are very supportive of President Trump or the Republicans or conservatives don't know some of the basic facts about the policies that have been effective. For example, when President Trump was president the first time, he cut taxes for the lower middle class in this country. It's something called, he doubled what's called the standard deduction. If you're someone in America who's working and is middle class, but you don't own a home or you're not paying a lot of taxes on your home, you basically pay a percentage of your taxes. There's no such thing as deductions. In other words, you just basically give the government a certain percentage that's been always the same. Donald Trump cut that in half. Now, this didn't help the rich in America. This helped people who are like plumbers and construction workers and folks who don't own very expensive homes that have high taxes because you're able to deduct those taxes from your federal taxes. So I'll bring that. That's just one example of a fact that I bring into my show that even people, if they're watching Fox News, which is the favorite channel of Republicans and right wingers in this country, they're not going to learn a lot from watching that show. They might like what they see and feel like, oh, I agree with that, but they don't learn new things. From me and my show, they'll learn new things. And so that's one thing that's different. Second is I am not interested in supporting or endorsing candidates. Like I said, I like most of Donald Trump's policies, but I don't tell you who to vote for, and I don't tell you who to like or not to like. I just look at policy and I say, like, this hasn't worked. So I'll say something like, the reason why I like capitalism is that because capitalism has reduced poverty more than anything else in the history of the world. And there's a lot of bad things about capitalism and things that are rough about it, but that is an undeniable fact. Capitalism brings people out of poverty and has ended starvation for more people than any other policy, period. So I remind people of things like that. Again, you don't have to vote for Republicans just because I said that, and I really don't care if you're not. But that's one of the things that I talk about. I also talk about things like mass. For example, here's another thing that I've written about for a long time, and it's something that people can understand. Remember, I said I don't like to use the word infrastructure. I like to use the word traffic. I like to use the word commuting and transit. Most people in the world spend a lot of time going to and from work, even if more of us are working from home, but it's still still a big part of our day for everyone. And by the way, it's a huge drain on the economy. It's hours and hours where people are just getting to work and not producing any goods and services. And so there really needs to be more discussion about how to make this better. And I talk a lot about that from an educated point of view. For example, the best mass transit system in the world is in Tokyo. And Tokyo's mass transit system is privately owned and run. It is not a government run agency. Now, it's not completely capitalist. It's backed up by the government. In other words, if it ever went out of business, the government would make sure that the trains would keep running. So it's not like any other business in that way. So I understand it's not pure capitalism, but it's pretty close. And that's why it's the best. Before 1989, the government in Tokyo did run the mass transit system, and it was a mess. They had a terrible accident in 1989, and that was the last straw. Now, I ask you, if you turn on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or many of the other stations out there, who on the air knows this? Doesn't mean I'm a genius, because I'm really not. There are so many people so much smarter than I am. But in my position, it seems like I have more of the facts at my disposal, more of the history at my disposal. And I really want to bring that to the viewers. And again, the way that I got that wasn't from just reading books, although that was part of it. It was from listening to people over all these years. So and by the way, that's another thing that's really different about my program. I encourage people on all the social media apps, because you can watch us on Twitter X, you can watch us live on Getter and on Rumble. And I tell people 2 or 3 times every hour, make sure you're commenting. This is not a passive exercise. I'm not here just to lecture you and for you to sit there like, I want you to comment. I want to hear it. And I read it during the commercial breaks so that I can see what people are saying. And that's something that's very new and important. I don't think that the news media in America has quite understood yet that nobody wants to be a passive viewer anymore. People want to have their own voices heard, even if it's just that the person looking at it, even if they don't put them on the camera. And that's another thing that's different. I promise you that the anchor people at Fox and CNN aren't reading the viewers' emails and comments on social media during the commercial breaks. And I think most of them couldn't care less. I do care. I am reading because that's how I learn. And some of the comments are nasty and some of them are stupid. But hey, some of the things I say are stupid sometimes too. So, who am I to judge? The point is, that's something that's very different about my program. And hopefully people will find out about it and realize, hey, this is a place where the guy's actually listening to me too, and he's not just asking me to listen to his lecture.
So one last question is, how did work affect you? Does that change the way you share the information or you create the content?
Can you say that again? You froze for a second.
Yeah. How does the feedback that you get from different audience of yours, how does that affect you, your content, and the way you express?
Well, sometimes it's something very simple. Sometimes I'll ask a question because I forget to give a background for something. For example, I had a couple of times in the last month a CEO of a solar power company. And the reason why I had him on was really not to talk about solar energy, but it's because he's an expert on energy in general. And I wanted him to talk about gas prices. I wanted him to talk about electricity. And I forget to tell the viewers that, oh, by the way, this guy's also, I told everyone he was a solar, I told everyone that he was a solar CEO, but I forget to tell everyone, hey, he's not like one of the CEOs of a solar company that has one of these solar farms where they take all these acres and acres of land and put the solar reflectors on there. He's someone who actually makes his business by putting the solar reflectors on top of already large buildings, which I think is great. This way, there's more land to use for farming or to build homes instead of just those solar reflectors. So someone just said, like, why do you have this guy on? And it reminded me, oh, I forgot to tell. Sometimes it's just they act as a reminder, but sometimes it's more serious. Sometimes they'll say something along the lines of, I'll give you an example. Last week and the week before, we finally saw some people in Gaza protesting against Hamas. I don't know if you saw that video. They were marching saying Hamas has put us in danger, give back the hostages. These were other Palestinians. These were not Israelis. These were Palestinian Muslims in Gaza marching against Hamas because they realized that they've put them in danger and they've killed so many of their people and they're angry about it. And I reported on that. And there were a number of people in the comments who rightfully noted that a lot of those protesters were genuine, but they were members of a rival to Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and it wasn't completely just about getting rid of Hamas. It was also about supporting the Palestinian Authority. So that was something that I sort of knew, but I looked into it, and they were right. And I mentioned it the next day when those protests continued for the second day. Doesn't mean those protests weren't real and important. I think they were both real and important, but it was a fact that I would have overlooked if it hadn't been for one of the viewers noting that to me. And again, I checked it. I didn't just take the viewer's word for it. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. Now, there's a lot of people in the business who do sometimes read the viewer comments after the show is over on Twitter, or they read it on Facebook, and there's a personal criticism, and it ruins their day. They're all sad about it. That doesn't bother me. But if they mention that there's a story I should cover, then I'm going to follow it. And a lot of times I get ideas. I'm willing to take ideas from anyone or anywhere. And I used to do that when I was running shows and I had very young interns who were still in high school or college. And I used to say, like, I don't care that you're very young and you haven't worked in this business. You live in the world just like anybody else. If you have an idea for a story, I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but tell me. So I feel the same way about the viewers. So I've learned a lot from them, and I've actually done stories or changed stories based on what the viewers directed me to.
So, as a journalist, as an observer, as a communicator, what's your observation about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Not yet, but what I have seen from you today is that you know how to ask a question. One of the great things about being a young person working in some kind of broadcasting and communications is even if you decide not to follow journalism in your career, you have no idea how many people your age can't speak to older people, can't speak clearly. They can only speak to people their own age. Maybe when they're doing their texting, they only use emojis or things like that. They forget how to use language and how to write in complete sentences. And I can see that your questions are very coherent, even though there's a language difference. I understood all your questions. So that's important. If you have the opportunity in the future, you're going to want to show more video. And instead of just our two faces talking at each other, see if you can run some video. So you could have, prepare. If I'm talking about what's going on with Donald Trump, you throw some video up of that. Believe it or not, that makes your production much more viewable, even though the content is the same. You're still saying the same things. So I know that's easier said than done. Believe me, I couldn't do it. I don't know how to do it myself yet, but I do know how to call for it and write it on a list and saying, here's the video I want here. Here's the graphic I want here. And if you have the ability to learn how to do that, or if you know how to do it already, you have no idea how much that will augment your product.
I have done masters in software engineering, also bachelor's in computer science and in engineering. And right now I'm working as a DevOps engineer for a London company from India remotely. So that's my full-time role. Apart from that, I'm interviewing experts like you who are into different industries, who are working in different parts of the world. I've interviewed more than 860 people, the country's experts, 5 years. So engineering is my primary role. Sitting in front of computer and communicating with machine is actually my job. So apart from that, I'm interviewing humans and trying to interact with them. Like, what was your passion in your in your early days that I'm doing now? So how this engineering skill along with the communications with global leaders and engineers, architects from different parts of the world who speak different kind of language. How this international level communications is going to contribute and helpful for me in the future. Your words.
Yeah, and it's very important to speak to people who are not your age. At a very young age, I got used to speaking to people who were much older than I was, just because of the community that I lived in. And in the United States, that's becoming rarer and rarer. More and more people are only interacting with people of their own age, especially younger people. And that's a huge disadvantage. You need to learn how to speak with adults, with people who are elderly, and also and in my case, people who are a lot younger. And for example, the people in my control room, I produce, anchor, and book the show, but I have a control room that runs the video, that runs the music, that runs the graphics. Most of them are 25, 24 years old. And I have a great communication relationship with them. It's not hard for me to communicate with them in any way. And that makes the show better too. So it runs through all the generations. So what you're doing is getting a tremendous skill that's getting more and more rare all over the world. I assume in India it's not as bad as it is in the United States, but it's probably something that's becoming a problem there too. People need to learn how to speak from people from all different walks of life and all different ages.
So can you share your online presence with my audience so that they can follow and they can listen to what you're saying?
Oh, thank you. Well, the easiest way to follow me is to follow my X account. My X handle is at JakeNY, JakeNY, at JakeNY. And I usually put up all the links to things that I'm doing there. So that's the easiest thing. But to watch the program, you can go on the X feed. I always retweet. There's a link to my show every day that appears on my X feed. And you can watch that any time of day. So you don't have to watch it live. You can see the hour of my program. So if you go on my X feed now and scroll down a little bit, you'll see that I put up a link to the X live stream of the show, and you can watch it from beginning to end or not watch it, whatever you want to do. That's the easiest thing to do. But you'll hear me, so it's Real America's Voice is the name of the TV station. But again, the Twitter handle is the best thing to work with. The Twitter X, I should say, the X handle, at JakeNY. That's the best way.
So can I put this video on my podcast with your permission?
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jake, again for
Okay.
your valuable time and giving answers to some of my questions and sharing your experiences with my audience.
My pleasure. Keep doing what you're doing. Good job.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.